He could be back. Donald Trump wants to return to the White House with JD Vance as his vice president. They plan to bring the MAGA movement back into power.
Together we will save this country and we will usher in the rich and wonderful tomorrows that our people so truly deserve. America's future will be bigger, better, bolder, brighter, happier, stronger, freer, greater, and more united than ever before.
At places like this, the European Council, such talk is prompting concern more than delight. Many Europeans fear Trump's promises for the US could reduce its security role in Europe, stop American aid for Ukraine, and introduce new tariffs on European products. They worry America first could mean Europe alone.
It will be super disturbing.
It's an existential year for Europe.
Yet some Europeans are rooting for another Trump victory.
We think that the last presidential term was very successful.
After an assassination attempt, Trump is planning to win again. So how are Europeans preparing for that? And what's the best approach they might take if it happens?
I'm Alexandra von Namen, DW's bureau chief here in Brussels, the heart of the European Union. I'm going to take you across the bloc to find out how different countries are looking at a potential second Trump presidency. We'll meet Trump lovers, those who fear him, and those who want to challenge his America First approach. There are many different views, but all agree they need to be prepared. Let's go. We are in Budapest, Hungary, whose long-standing Prime Minister Viktor Orban is openly rooting for a Trump victory in November. Both leaders seem to share similar views on issues such as migration or pushing against democratic institutions. Orban's Hungary First policy has been in place long before Trump's first run for the White House.
Orban has met with Trump many times. The men talk of their mutual admiration. Often at the Hungarian Prime Minister's side, Balázs Orban. Not a relation, but his right-hand man for years.
There is a very good personal connection between the two leaders. And Prime Minister Orban was the only European leader who supported him before he was elected. So I think this is a very solid basis for mutual understanding and relationship.
Arguably a populist, Viktor Orban has been in power in Hungary for 14 years. He's transformed the country, turning it into what critics call a hybrid regime of electoral autocracy. He has changed the constitution and gradually taken control of Hungary's media landscape. Orban presents himself as a defender of Christianity and traditional family values. His government has built a fence along the border to Serbia and introduced new laws criminalizing migrants. In Donald Trump, Orban and his supporters see a like-minded leader.
In many policy areas, we have the same goals: stopping illegal migrations, protecting, in a way, national sovereignty. These two leaders are big fighters against woke ideology, which overtaken many institutions, many schools, many educational facilities in the last years.
That approach has led to Orban being isolated within the EU. Many see his alliance with Trump as part of a global attack on democratic traditions. He also angered fellow Europeans by visiting Russia's Vladimir Putin and China's Xi Jinping to discuss an end to the war in Ukraine. While most other EU leaders fear Trump could hold US aid to Ukraine and push for a peace deal submitting to Russian demands, Orban and his team see Trump as an honest peace broker.
We think that we need more peacemakers on the Western Hemisphere, because we alone cannot have a change. If there is an American leadership which is focusing on first achieving ceasefire and using that calm period of time to start very complicated, very heavy negotiations, then it would be much better for us.
Even though it were at the cost of Ukrainian territory?
But this will be the outcome anyhow. And this is why we don't understand that everybody knows that at some point these peace talks will come. Why don't we speed it up and try to save lives and not risk the further escalation of the conflict, which could lead actually us to a direct NATO-Russia confrontation.
Orban's camp does not believe that Kiev can win the war. Despite being a member of NATO, Hungary has opted out of sending any military assistance to Ukraine. That's just one of many reasons why Viktor Orban would like to see Biden replaced by Trump in the White House.
A second Trump presidency would be a win for the Hungarian leader, who is largely isolated in the European Union. Criticized for cracking down on the opposition, independent media and minorities, Orban appears to hope that Donald Trump, if elected, won't say anything about what is happening in Hungary.
Here in Budapest, the government would welcome a Trump win. Further west in Europe, it's a very different story. Some leaders fear a second Trump presidency, but others are ready to rise to the challenge.
We are in Paris, the capital of France, where they don't seem to be too afraid at the prospect of Donald Trump returning to the White House. France is the only real military power in the European Union. Its leaders previously never seemed to have a problem with acknowledging when French interests and the country's global aspirations clash with America's. For years now, President Macron has been advocating for more European sovereignty and less dependence on the US. The motto in Paris now seems to be, we need to depend mostly on ourselves.
At the French Parliament, the National Assembly, we meet with Benjamin Haddad, a member of Emmanuel Macron's Renaissance Party. He says he believes Trump is a symptom of a long-term decline in transatlantic relations.
In 2016, I think a lot of Europeans were in denial and thought that Trump's election was an accident of history, was something that would only last 4 years, and then we'd go back to normal, a transatlanticist America. And the truth is, I think he's an accelerator of pre-existing trends. There's something deeper that's going on in American politics.
That is something which has informed President Macron's calls for more European autonomy in areas such as defense and industrial policy. Speaking this spring, Macron said the days of Europe relying on the US for security are over. He said the return of war to European soil had changed everything. Many in his party agree.
We can't just depend on the decision of Michigan and Pennsylvania voters to vote in the right direction every 4 years. We can't put our security at stake by just flipping a coin every 4 years. Look, I think we've done so much in the last few years, and we have to look at the glass half full. We've been able to support Ukraine alongside the United States with military aid, with economic and financial aid through the European Peace Facility, for example. So you've seen some of the progress, but there's still a lot to do.
During Donald Trump's first term in office, Emmanuel Macron was one of only a few European leaders who tried to form a rapport with him. The bond between the two was once even dubbed Le Bromance by a newspaper. But eventually, their relationship turned sour. And that accelerated the French move towards more self-sufficiency.
Of course, we'll always continue to talk to our allies and partners, not shy away from disagreements, but at the same time continue to invest in our own security to be able to defend our interests.
But this summer, an election created a period of political uncertainty by badly weakening Macron and strengthening forces on the far left and far right. This may diminish French chances to have a big say on the future of transatlantic relations. But who else could take the European lead?
We're in Berlin, only a few steps away from the Brandenburg Gate, one of Germany's most emblematic symbols that has also been the backdrop of iconic moments in US-German relations for decades. Whether John F. Kennedy, Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton or Barack Obama, many US presidents stopped by or held memorable speeches here. In recent history, it seemed both countries were bound to each other by a close friendship based on historical ties, shared values and common interests. But when Donald Trump was in the White House, this friendship was shaken to the core. So what will happen if he is elected again?
Many in Germany's parliament, the Bundestag, are wary of the prospect. We meet with Metin Hagverdi, a lawmaker from the ruling Social Democrats.
We are dependent on the security guarantees of the United States. And in case of a Trump victory in November, this could be questioned. So it will be super disturbing, super disturbing, as much disturbing as it was in the first term.
During his first term in office, Donald Trump appeared to be obsessed with Germany. He repeatedly criticized the country's trade surpluses and defense spending levels. And time again, he made clear that in his view, Germany was a nation of freeloaders taking advantage of the US for many years.
Since then, Germany has invested more in its own defense and is the biggest EU supplier of military assistance to Ukraine. And its trade surplus is down, thanks to higher energy prices. But despite all this, the current government remains uncertain on how to deal with a potential new Trump administration, or even who to talk with in preparation.
It's difficult to define a Trump camp. So what we've been doing, what I've been doing, but others as well, is trying to get a grip of members of the Republican Party, representatives of the Trumpists, so to speak. And there are one or two contacts, not that much more. It's very difficult. But there are others outside the Republican Party, I would say, that could be useful for the future. I think we are better prepared than we were in the first term.
Angela Merkel was Germany's chancellor back then. The two leaders did not get on. During their inaugural meeting, Trump appeared to withhold a handshake with Merkel. Could Olaf Scholz do better with Trump? They've met several times, like here back in 2017 when Scholz was mayor of Hamburg, as well as later when he was Merkel's finance minister. But there seemed to be no real chemistry between them.
There is no personal relationship. This is a problem with him. It's not a question of whether Olaf Scholz has a better situation with him or not. So the problem is Trump only. So that's why it's very difficult to answer that question, because it will be a team effort to get around this.
That team effort will have to stretch beyond Germany. It will have to cover the whole European Union. How should they approach it?
We are back in Brussels, the center of European power and seat of the EU's most important institutions. Institutions Donald Trump did not seem to understand or care about during his first term in office. But there was one man who he did seem to respect: Jean-Claude Juncker, president of the European Commission when Trump was president. Trump described him as a tough cookie.
Juncker is retired now, but still maintains an office in the Commission.
If he strikes, you have to strike back. If he's nice, you have to be nice. Sometimes, when he hits, you have to avoid his blows by being extremely nice.
He gives us a concrete example of how he dealt with Trump. They met at the White House in 2018 at the high point of a trade war between the US and the EU. Trump wanted to impose tariffs. Juncker offered him a deal, knowing the US president was having trouble with American farmers.
So I offered that we import more soybeans, even though the Commission was not in charge of regulating soybean exports. I presented him with the prospect of exporting more liquefied gas to Europe. We would build 14 LNG terminals and so on.
Trump liked the deal and an escalation was averted. Even though the deal never happened as promised, Juncker earned Trump's respect. His advice to his fellow European leaders if Trump gets elected again:
You have to treat him as an equal, without insulting him or questioning his competence. We just have to sharpen the European positions and make it clear that we are not vassals of the United States of America, but rather partners who have to deal with each other as equals. This is how I dealt with Trump. I didn't go into the Oval Office in a cringing posture, but stood my ground.
Juncker's Trump whispering tips may have something for everyone. Don't be afraid, be bold. That sounds like the Parisian approach. Yet Juncker also show respect. That's certainly coming from Budapest. And says Juncker, take Trump seriously. Berlin is definitely doing that. The Europeans seem to have all the right ingredients to deal with a second Trump presidency, should it come. Whether they can work together to mix them with a common goal in mind is another question altogether.